everyone. Welcome to this edition of Business and Policy Dialogue. I take great pleasure in welcoming all of you today, July 1st, which incidentally we also celebrate as National Doctors Day. So I want to take a moment to sort of thank all the doctors who have tuned in here to this program, but also all our friends across, very happy Doctors Day, and also express our gratitude for all that you have done over the past 15 odd months during the pandemic. And of course, as always, your support is very much appreciated. It's interesting and a very nice coincidence that on this occasion, we have a very senior officer from the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Ms. Aarti Ahuja, Additional IAS, who's the Additional Secretary in the Ministry, to talk about and share her insights on rejuvenating India's public health system and working with the private sector. Again, Professor Sarang Dev, who is the Professor of Operations Management and Executive Director of the Max Institute of Healthcare Management at ISB, will be in conversation with Ms. Ahuja. I want to take a minute to introduce both of them very briefly. Ms. Ahuja is an Indian Administrative Service Officer of the 1990 batch, who's a Master's in Economics and also a law graduate. She has had a career of over 30 years in both Government of India and the state of Odisha. She's been secretary in various departments such as Handloom and Handicrafts, Women and Child Development, Health and Family Welfare in Odisha, and has been the additional secretary in the Health Ministry for over a year now. She's a master's in public policy from the Princeton School of International Affairs and also a master's in public health from Harvard University. So an officer with the appropriate kind of mid-career qualifications to be serving in a department like Health and Family Welfare. She's also has been a member of the independent expert group of Global Nutrition Report, an independent global report brought out each year, and was also a senior honorary research associate at the Global Institute of Health, University of Chicago as well. And again, she's written a number of articles for journals and books. Ms. Ahuja, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, and we look forward to your thoughts and insights. I do want to take a minute to also introduce Professor Sarang Dev, my colleague at the Indian School of Business. Professor Dev is Professor of Operations Management, as I mentioned earlier. His primary area of interest is in healthcare operations, with special emphasis on investigating the impact of operations decisions on population-level health outcomes. He studied the influenza vaccine supply chain and the phenomenon of ambulance diversion in the US, the adult HIV treatment supply chains, and the infant HIV diagnosis networks in sub-Saharan Africa, and more recently the TB diagnosis pathway in rural India. Of course, with the pandemic, Professor Dev has also been heavily involved in working with various state governments and also advising a few governments, both in terms of vaccine issues and also in terms of testing strategies and so on. And I know he's a member of the expert advisory group in Punjab and a few other states as well. Prior to joining ISB, Sarang was an assistant professor at the Kellogg School of Management, and he's a PhD from the UCLA Anderson School of Management and an alumnus of IIM Ahmedabad and IIT Bombay. Professor Sarang Dev, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. And before I hand it over to you, I just want to give a quick sort of housekeeping announcement to all those of you who tuned in. Those of you who have joined us on Zoom, please do use the Q&A section to pose your questions. We'll start with a few remarks by Ms. Ahuja, and then Professor Dev will be in conversation with her. And when the time for Q&A from the audience round opens up, please do sort of pose in your questions in the Q&A box of the Zoom platform. I know some of you are also joined us on Facebook Live, and Sarang, what we'll try and do is to put those questions, collate from there and pose it here so that it's easier for you to sort of pick up from one platform. With those few words, I do want to again thank you everyone and welcome you all, and over to you, Sarang.
Thank you, Guru. Thank you, Ms. Ahuja, for finding time to join us for this dialogue. Things are always busy at the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, but more so in recent times. So really appreciate. I thought I'll just, maybe set the context with a couple of, remarks at the beginning for the audience, and then hand it over to you so that you have more time. Then we'll come back and maybe have an exchange, and then later open for the audience. So just in my view, the role of private sector in India is complex and is difficult to ascertain for people who belong to the Indian healthcare system. It's like fish. When fish is in the water, water is not very special for the fish, right? And so unless we look at other healthcare system across the world, the uniqueness of Indian healthcare system doesn't become apparent. And I think the extent to which private sector contributes to health giving in India, I think belies its socialist roots, country's socialist roots. Private sector plays a large role. Private sector is also very varied. So, in this audience, we shouldn't think that private sector is only the organized chain hospitals. There's a vast spectrum of individual practitioners, of varying training, small nursing homes, mid-tier hospitals, so on and so forth. Whether we will be able to do justice to all aspects of private healthcare and private healthcare players today in the time that we have, it is difficult. But I wanted to set that out for the audience. I also wanted to say that PPPs are a phenomenon that is sort of known in other sectors in the economy as well. But we would like to bring out the differences in, let's say, PPP for roads and bridges versus PPP for healthcare. And to the extent possible, we would like to not spend too much time on building hospitals as an example of use of PPP, but how PPP can be used to deliver care and take care of patients directly. So with those, some opening thoughts, Ms. Ahuja, I'll hand it over to you. I know you have a short presentation which will set the tone and the context for the discussion. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Actually, you set the tone very well. And just what I would have said about the private sector being superior. So I have just I think 5 or 6 slides just to hinge our discussion on, and I would really love to engage with the audience more through the question answer session. So let's just go to the first slide, and the first one. The first one, please. I think somehow we are not able to see the full slide, but this is a salute to all the doctors. Today, as you mentioned, is also the National Doctors' Day. So honoring all the doctors out there and the non-doctors out there, for us to recognize the work being done by them. Their passion and dedication is enormous. I have been touring states, I have been going to hospitals, I have been going to containment zones, and I find each and every person doing their level best. So really salute to all of them. Next. Now what you mentioned about private sector, it's not just the chain hospitals. When we are looking at the health sector as a system, as a whole, as you mentioned, as the whole water body, which has different kinds of fishing and different kinds of entities or bodies in it. So there are the providers, but providers are again there for different types. Even there are providers of services. We have people like Portia, for example, who supply paramedics and nurses and other. There are in fact security agencies that provide healthcare. There are startups. You wear a band and if your heart is fluctuating, a signal immediately goes somewhere and the ambulance reaches you. So these are all private sector providers. There are clinics. There are also quacks. They are also private sector providers. There are pharmacists. There are chemists. There are Ayurvedic practitioners, homeopathic, Siddha. All these kind of people are there as part of the private sector. Then, of course, there is a very major component of manufacturers who make devices and equipment. And the COVID response showed us the agility and the response of the manufacturers of devices. Just to give you an example, in our country, in 70 years, we only had 2,186 ICU beds in the whole country. Today, we have 1.16 lakhs. These are all, this is a jump of 54 times almost. And how did it happen? Because the ventilators that were always included started being manufactured in India. We did not have PPEs. Zilch PPE manufacturing capacity in the country. but the industry responded, and today we are exporting PPEs. The whole textile industry wanted sanitizers, masks. So all these things, N95 masks, today we are we are exporting to other countries. Then drugs and vaccines. We all know you are in ISV Hyderabad, Professor Deo, and Covaxin is a joint, you may call it partnership, you may call it PPE, a joint effort by a private entity and a government entity, that is Bharat Biotech and ICMR. So drugs and vaccines, even the drug manufacturers, things like remdesivir, tocilizumab, medicines we had never heard of. The manufacturers ramped up their production capacity, under a lot of stress, but they did it. So all these things have happened in our country, and on an ongoing basis. I mean, this was the COVID response, but on an ongoing basis, and not just for COVID, but overall, the private sector also feeds into policy through academia, through experts like Professor Deo here. So, and then different associations. Recently, we had a very good meeting with IMA, for example. We did a webinar along with AIIMS Delhi on clinical management. Then there are colleges, there are research bodies, there are private labs. Again, giving the example of COVID, we only had one lab in the country, in the government sector, that was NIT Pune, when the pandemic happened last year. Today we have 2,600 plus, and about 1,500 of those are in the private sector, more than in the public sector. So they are also part of the healthcare system, and of course there are a lot of other entities out there in the private sector which contribute. Next, please. Can we? Thank you. So this is just telling you very briefly about what are the core capacities which are driving our response to COVID. And all of these have a private sector engagement. Surveillance is totally community-based surveillance. The private providers, the private sector are involved in the community level surveillance, and not just that, at the IT level of that surveillance as well. Testing, I just told you, infrastructure, I told you, how many private hospitals have converted to COVID hospitals, given their beds for that. Not only that, the private sector has got very heavily engaged in building hospitals, makeshift facilities for many state governments and districts. Then logistics augmentation and capacity building. Through the online training modules, we've trained about 1.6 crore people from the private sector and the government sector in management. Even building skills, for example. And these are all open, available on the YouTube channels. AIIMS has, you're welcome to visit that. Anybody can learn from this. And then targeted and focused communication, where again the private sector has played a major role. Next, please. I'll just tell you very briefly, there are a lot of good practices. This is not to say that these are the only ones, but some good, a few of the good practices in COVID management. These have been compiled by NITI, so I'm just picking up from there. So surveillance, as I just told you, it's extremely important. How do we know who is positive, where their contacts are, So people who are likely to have COVID present with certain symptoms, which are similar to ILI, which is like a flu-like symptom. So, for example, not just Puducherry, many other state governments also did this. They said, let us find out, because our system is not able to capture this kind of information. So let us ask the private pharmacists. Let us ask the individual practitioners whether there are SARI, severe acute respiratory infection kind of people coming to them for buying of medicines or coming with those symptoms. Let us hear from them and let us find out. Let us get them tested for COVID. And this way, they were able to proactively find a larger number of people who then they could test and track and treat. Next, please. Similarly, Odisha, again, what they did, Odisha was one of the first states in the country which had a dedicated COVID hospital in each district. So what they did was they talked to the private providers and they dedicated a full hospital for COVID and paid those hospitals through their own CSR funds of the Odisha Mining Corporation. Similarly, in Gujarat, what they did was that they asked the private hospitals to block a certain portion of their hospital, somewhere 50%, somewhere less, for COVID beds when the cases were going up. And they assured that even if there are no patients, we will pay you the charges. Similarly, in Madhya Pradesh, these fever clinics were set up. Fever clinics are a very good source for basically tapping into the whole ecosystem of people who be positive. We come to know that people coming with different symptoms, fever, etc., could be COVID positive. So these, the private sector, the small establishments got roped in. They became fever clinics, and whoever came to them, they were treated, tested, etc. Next, please. So that was about COVID. But when Professor Deo, when you made your introductory remarks, you were talking about the TB program, and also you said it's not just about building hospitals; it's being engaged in the treatment aspects. And I think TB as a program is an excellent example of being very progressive in its thinking. It's one of the programs where the approach has become of a forward-looking program, of a program that engages with a whole lot of entities in program management, in direct program management. So I'm going to just quickly run you through just 6 elements of program management in that work. So testing, so running labs. So in the public sector itself, we can in-source labs of the private sector. Reagents can be rented, and procurement of services through the private sector. Then, of course, there is a bit of a compulsory thing that was also done. That is, whoever is coming to the private sector should notify that I got a person who is TB positive. This is more for the purposes of surveillance, making sure that these people are known in the system and they are followed up for their treatment, because otherwise there could be drug resistance developing later. And this PPSA, patient provider support system, is something unique in the world. It has in fact been acknowledged by many organizations, international organizations, as being something very unique to India. This is where an NGO basically is appointed as an interface between the private sector, which could be a small clinic, a small entity in a district or in a block. So between the patient and the private sector, ensuring that end-to-end coordination and collaboration. And of course, involvement with the government hospitals and NGOs. Now on the treatment part, as I was mentioning, that treatment is extremely critical. It's a very clinical thing, but it also is a public health thing. It's not just about clinical management, because it relates to the behavior of the person and the behavior of the DOTS providers, for example. So it's very important that treatment is initiated in time, and it's even more important that the treatment regimen is completed. So in treatment, free drugs to the private sector, once they notify, then there are partnership schemes with the private sector for setting up treatment centers. Teleconsultation, in fact, is something which also happened in the COVID response and was also there in TB and got taken up in COVID. I mean, as of today, the eSanjeevani that we have, it's had about 70 lakh consultations where both government and private providers are there. a very successful model. And then there are echo clinics where we have people who have TB which is difficult to treat, and where the inputs of the private providers and the government providers are brought together. There are discussion forums. There is learning, cross learning from each other. So that is in treatment. Next. And then program management. So there are HR gaps, and we have a number of partners actually who have taken up areas, geographies of work, and also thematic areas. So we have partners who work on building capacity across. There are partners who will take up certain districts in certain states who will say, okay, I'm going to fill in the HR gaps there. So in the high burden states, we actually encourage this kind of partners. Then of course there are call centers which are again our own call center where we have inputs from the private sector, skill development programs through the private institutions, the academia, and service delivery also has been outsourced in many blocks and districts, where through our partners we identify areas where where there could be an additional provider, there could be different other mechanisms for ensuring that service delivery is happening. Then in the area of research, in fact just a few days back we were reviewing this, in the area of research, the private institutions and the academia are involved in basic research. They are involved in vaccine development. They are involved in point of care tests. In fact, new tests are coming up which can diagnose TB very quickly. So all those things are coming up. The India Health Fund has been set up, which drives the startups for innovative health products. I was mentioning, for example, the earlier examples. And then overlaying all this are the digital interventions. Our Nikshay software, for example, there is also an app. The Nikshay software has all been developed with the very, very active collaboration of our partners, whether they are in the development sector or whether they are in the private sector. So very close involvement. Adherence, I'll tell you a bit about that. And artificial intelligence is now, we recently had a very productive meeting with the Ministry of Information Technology, where we have proposed certain things that can be done through artificial intelligence. For example, the test I was telling you about, if just measuring the reactivity on the skin, a photograph can be taken, and the AI can tell you whether it is within the parameters or not of being positive. Similarly, chest x-rays. Many countries, in fact, have now moved on to artificial intelligence algorithms for chest x-rays to determine a priori before the person goes to the doctor whether that person could be a TB patient. In fact, in Tamil Nadu and Kerala, as a pilot, they're already doing that. And during COVID, a lot of people got their chest x-rays done. So they screened all of them, and they found that nearly 7 to 8% of them turned out to be TB patients. So this is, through AI, we can do a lot of things. Our country has decided that we will eliminate by 2025. So there's not much time left. It's just 3 years basically. By 24 we should be there, because 25 will come and then we should have eliminated by then. So there's not much time left. So all these, so we are very conscious that the private sector is a. So let's go on to the next slide. I will not run my video for some time. And this is just an example of some interventions that have been done. Just a small thing, just something interesting. What we have is 99 dots, directly observed treatment in the TB. So what happens here is this is a kind of that a technology. So random numbers are printed on the blister packs, and these are linked to a particular patient, and that patient just has to give a free call on that number. And then the software helps the program monitor whether that person has taken the required dose at the required time. And MERM, or this pill box, is again a monitoring treatment adherence platform. So there are sensors that are linked to a software that captures information every time that box is opened. So the people are given that regimen, and so that way there are a lot of things. We are also working. Next, please. We are also working with a lot of private entrepreneurs and startups on also, as I told you, on treatment adherence, ensuring, doing some kind of machine learning, finding out who are the kind of people who are most likely to drop out of treatment. So those kind of things are also something that is going on. So I think that is kind of the end of my presentation, and I hope I will adhere to the time limit, and look forward to your questions and queries.
Thank you, Ms. Ahuja. Absolutely, we are on time. I thought I could start the discussion with a couple of questions, and then audience can write down their questions in the Q&A box, and we'll get to those in a few minutes. Before we get to specifics, say TV program or other such programs, I wanted to ask you, you've been in different sectors, you've been in MOHFW before, women and child development, but also other sectors. Do you see anything specific to healthcare that makes private partnership that much more challenging and complex, but also, rewarding? Because there are both sides to the same coin. If you could elaborate on the specialness of healthcare, because we probably have people who are from other sectors and may be interested in looking into healthcare, so that will help us.
Thank you. So if you look at it from an economist's point of view, working in health sector is very different, because we are both the producers and the consumers of healthcare, which is not there in any other sector. Those are two distinct entities and two different thought processes, two different silos, which meet at an equilibrium. But in healthcare, that's not the case. We are both the producers and the consumers of healthcare, and we produce our own health. We also consume our own health. And in a macro sense, so this is a sector where another thing that distinguishes is that there is a long gestation period. You mentioned about building bridges or buildings. It's, you do A plus B plus C, and it ends in a certain thing which is very quantifiable, which is achievable in a period of 1 year or so. Health is not like that, or nutrition, or so there the gestation period of whatever interventions you do is very long, the outcome. And the next part is that there is a socio-economic gradient. There are huge inequalities. There are so many factors which cannot even be quantified, which go into delivery of healthcare as well as consumption of healthcare. There are lots of issues. So that way it's a very, very challenging sector to work in. But at the same time, to my mind, and I'm very passionate about healthcare, it is also the most rewarding sector. Because the way you can change things in a very fundamental manner is only possible in this sector, out of all the social sectors. So I would say, all of you out there, this is a beautiful sector, and you will get hooked on to health sector once you start working.
Thank you, Ms. Ahuja. I'm pretty sure people are already, their eyes are lit up when you mentioned AI and information technology, because that's really the future for healthcare. I agree with that. Just so taking on from here, when I talk to people in private sector and talk about this public-private partnership, one of the recurring issues that comes up, theme that comes up, is how do we work with the government when we know that government probably wears three hats in healthcare, maybe more, but three that come to mind. One is that they create the regulations, so they are regulators. Second, they finance, in varying degrees to varying players. And third, they also provide. So provisioning, financing, and regulation. And when we enter the healthcare sector, we most likely are in the provisioning phase. Provisioning of technology, provisioning of products, provisioning of services. And it feels like we are entering an arena where we are, so much smaller as compared to a large player, government, with multiple facets. And some questions that are coming will be in similar lines. So how do we navigate this? How do we work with the government? How do we understand the partnership nature?
So to respond to that, just as you said, the private sector is not the monolith, nor is the government. Government is not this one block sitting somewhere. It's not a monolith. It has so many aspects. So the ANM and the ASHA are government. School teacher is government, just as the additional secretary is government. Right? So there are different levels at which the engagement can happen. I agree with you that regulation is a function which is a government, which is a sovereign function. Right? But even in regulation, any policy that is made today is on the web for inviting public comments. Right? So anybody who feels they are a stakeholder or who have a view to offer can give their inputs into regulation. Similarly, financing. Today, the Jan Andolan of TB, every month we have, we push TB in some way or the other. The Jan Andolan is totally privately financed. We have a corporate engagement, a corporate TB pledge, which is again totally financed by the corporate sector. The workplace TB, interventions or financing for a lot of media. They are making films, they are making short clips, they are doing advertisements, all being done by the private sector. So even in financing, they are, in fact, probably the budget on that side is bigger than the ministry's budget for TB. I'm not sure, but it is substantial. Their contribution is substantial, and then of course provision. So I would say in all of these, people are equal stakeholders, and private sector of all kinds engage with government of all kinds at all levels. So we need to also look at it in a horizontal manner, not just the vertical manner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very appropriate. And I was going to relate my next question to that. You mentioned, there are different levels of government, and I was wondering if you could speak to, again, for a slightly, I wouldn't say lay audience, but those who don't understand the intricacies of government decision making. When we say PPP in healthcare, what sort of decisions or policies would be made at the central level, where you sit in Delhi? And what are the decisions or policies which are made at the state level, which could, vary from state to state? Again, I know it's a very, large question and will take a lot of time, but just to give a flavor to our audience,
it can only be a flavor then. Okay.
Yes, just as even an example, maybe just an example.
So the examples, for example, that health is a state subject, right? The national government makes the broad policy. If you take the example of COVID, for example, the advisories on travel, the advisories on restaurants, what to follow, what not to follow. The recent thing that have a normative framework. If your positivity is this much, or if your cases are increasing like this, if your bed capacity is so much, then do this, then do that. Those are the broad things. But then the states themselves have policies, and in those policies, they may, for example, I gave you the example, let's say of Odisha or of Madhya Pradesh. So they may decide to make a policy which could be different. And our advisories always have that line in them that the states are free to make. These are just normative guidelines. So the states do that. And many states have different ways of going about it. But as I told you, any policy will have the inputs. In fact, all the guidelines and advisories we put out are done through an expert group. There's a national task force and there's a joint monitoring. The joint monitoring group has doctors and paramedics from the private sector very actively engaged, very actively engaged. In the TB program, for example, Vedanta, for example, has taken up the whole state of Haryana for TB elimination. So very heavily engaged in policy making as well.
Makes sense. Thank you for that explanation. Just to connect to what you said earlier about the long gestation period, I fully agree with you because at least when we move from infectious diseases to non-communicable diseases, what I do today has a long-term consequence on my own health and health of the population. And at the same time, private sector may not have the same long timelines, right? They work from quarter to quarter. They have their own earnings and whatnot. How do you think one could align the incentives of private sector, especially when it comes to the new wave, non-communicable diseases and management of diseases rather than curing, which we've been sort of traditionally thinking of? And are there any thoughts in the ministry of how do you transplant learnings from, let's say, TB, as you said, it's at the vanguard of private sector engagement, and how can that be translated to, let's say, non-communicable diseases, diabetes, hypertension?
So primarily, if I understand you correctly, it is also about private sector moving from a curative approach to a health and wellness approach, right? And so not just looking at people as they come in as patients, but also as people who need to be nudged and guided in a certain lifestyle-related choice. And I'm very happy to share with you that is something which is already part of the approach of the government. That having more and more private sector engagement in building that whole health and wellness. And we all know that private sector, not just in terms of hospitals, but private sector as such in various domains. The health and wellness market is one of the fastest growing markets now. And so the private sector is getting engaged very heavily in the whole control of non-communicable diseases, which in many cases are due to the lifestyle choices we make, right? So that is happening. And I think the pace at which it is happening is also very impressive.
Got it. Thank you. I'll move to questions that audience is asking. One of the natural questions in everyone's mind is, and you also described how during the COVID pandemic, private sector engagement has gone up a notch in very short period of time. Many things have happened. From your vantage point, do you see lessons from there that now you say, okay, we're not going to go back to pre-pandemic, and ABC things are now likely to stick when it comes to private, public-private partnership or private sector engagement in health?
It's not just ABC, it's from A to Z, which is going to stick. The lesson we have learned is that it's an all of society approach. Otherwise, as a country, you cannot fight a pandemic of this nature. You cannot, unless everybody is involved. And this is the lesson I think that all of us, whether it is private sector or government or anybody, or even as a citizen of the country, we have understood that. Because all said and done, when we are talking of transmission, who are the variables there? One is the virus, another is us, right? So virus enters, we don't allow it to enter. It goes on to somebody else through us, we shouldn't allow that. So the virus will do its thing, it will mutate. But I think this understanding that in a way we are all connected to each other, that has come about. And it is not just about sectors, it is about people. As I said, if you look at it as a horizontal manner. Just to give an example of a policy, very recently we took out a policy of COVID management in rural areas and peri-urban areas, which has a very strong community and private sector connect and taking their inputs at each level, right? So I think we have understood that is the way to. And when we are talking of the health sector as such, and you mentioned earlier about the statistics, we all need to understand that there is nothing to be gained from too much rent seeking, or there's nothing to be gained from just looking at the cure and not the prevention, etc. So I think that realization has come by itself due to this pandemic, and that is not going to go.
Perfect. Thanks. Other questions in sort of similar vein that I'm seeing here. One is, and this may be a thorny issue, but let me still put it up there because now we are on a common forum. One of the challenges that private players face is when they work with the government, and government has its own system of of procuring services, screening of entities, so on and so forth, and then payment after the service provision is done. And people do face difficulties in payments. I know there isn't a single answer, but are there things that you want to using this forum sort of tell private providers about this issue and how one could work together to resolve this?
So one of the answers to that is technology, and we have excellent examples of that in all the medical corporations that have been set up in this place. What the premise on which the medical corporations have been founded, and they make huge procurements in all this thing. Now all procurements have to do. The premise the corporations work on is quick payments. It is actually a very good model of software and technology being used to obviate the need for human discussion. Right? So this happens, it's a simple algorithm. If this happens this, if this happens that, payment will happen. Similarly, I would like to tell you about the Mamta scheme of Instagram. We started it in 2011 or 12, right? So it's a 400 plus crore scheme. Women, it's a conditional cash transfer scheme. You fulfill certain conditions like tablets, pay the child, you get paid certain sum, all on the click of a button, right? So somebody verifies it is there in the public domain, and whoever is pregnant is given that money in her account. So technology can actually help the matters a lot, and all over the country, the states are doing excellent, and so are many programs run by the government.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Just yesterday we were talking about ASHA workers and how their payments can be sped up. And there also it seems the ministry has rolled out an app that if the ASHA workers are familiar with, will cut short the delay, the different steps in between, and in turn may motivate ASHAs to do their work better and result in better outcomes. So that makes a lot of sense. One other question that I've got here is, and again very specific, as you said, private sector is so varied, but let's step in the shoes of a small to medium-sized institute, they are saying. So maybe this is a hospital/institute. How can such an entity approach the government for establishing a PPP from a service delivery perspective, where they may be utilizing existing government infrastructure with trained HR, but then sort of they take on the service delivery? I know it's a very specific question, but maybe gives again people a window into broader issues.
So the person you need to is the MD NHS, because under the National Health Mission, in fact, whoever's asked this question, this started about 20 years back. This model, even today, it is there. So involving the private sector and the non-government sector organizations in service delivery. It could be remotely done. Government gives the financing for that. It could be sub-centers where there is a, let's say, immunization emergency, or if institutional births are not happening, it could be that. It could even be district hospitals. So we have multiple models of that in the country, and already there is a mandate under the National Health Mission. So if you're a small hospital anywhere, there are regular, advertisements taken out by NHM. But do approach them and put in your request or your proposal to the MD NHM.
Perfect. One question is about building on your comments about the capacity built during COVID and for COVID. Large capacity has been built, money has been spent. And the question is, what will happen to this capacity after the pandemic is over? Now, first, everyone is hoping that the pandemic is over. But are there plans of how this private capacity may be utilized for public health outcomes afterwards?
So there are two answers to this. One is learning never goes waste. And I think as a teacher yourself, you realize that, and you've been a student as well. Learning never goes waste. So whatever has been learned, all these 1.6 crore people they have learned some specific things about COVID management. They have learned how to do surveillance. They have learned how to do contact tracing. But they have also learned other things. They have also learned how to deal with mental illness, for example. How to deal with, if somebody is pregnant and they're asking you certain things, how do you respond to them? So they have learned a lot of things. Different people have learned different things. That learning is going to stay. It is not always that the learning is linked to an employment or to a post. It's not necessary, because what we are doing with this is we are creating a corpus, a large corpus of conscientious citizens, a large corpus of what we call corona warriors, who can then use their skills anywhere. Just to give you an example, there was a fire in a tertiary care hospital where newborns were there, and just because the paramedics had been trained, they immediately evacuated this child. So it's not something that ever goes waste, right? That is the first response to it. Now about it being useful as a gainful employment in the future, why not? Because they are being given a certificate, and they could be anybody. It could be a BSc pass person who got trained in let's say midwifery or got trained in something else. Why use that, and then they can be given further hands-on training to make them even more capable. So yes, they are people who are out there and should be used.
Okay. One thing that comes up, and TB again is a good example, but even in other settings, one of the barriers for public-private partnership, true partnership, is sometimes fundamental disagreements and honest disagreements on how to manage the disease, how to manage clinical condition. And I think this is unique in healthcare. There is evidence, and then there is evidence, and then there is evidence. And it is then sort of colored further by incentives in the private sector. And so what ends up happening is practices in the private sector of managing a condition can be very different versus practices in the public sector. And there may not be a very easy right or wrong answer. In your experience, does this come up, and are there ways to address this in a sort of transparent, collaborative way, which can then further strengthen PPP models?
I guess at some level it is possible that world over, pharma companies may be pushing some evidence. Take the case of smoking. The Surgeon General's report came out, and all the evidence, all the studies world over were saying smoking is good, it makes you sleep. Right? So it is possible that many times some evidence could be driven by other considerations. So when we are making policy, when we are deciding what kind of drugs to use, for example, it's extremely important to be cognizant. And it's extremely important to take in all shades of and all evidence, which is why not just for COVID, but for TB, we have a task force, which is not government. It is people from different parts of the country, private sector doctors, experts, they could be microbiologists, pulmonologists, respiratory disease specialists. They could be state TB officers. So taking inputs from all of that is how the clinical management is, right? So it has to be done very, very properly.
Yeah.
Because there are huge stakes.
No, I can vouch for that. There is a adherence working group for tuberculosis as well, and you mentioned some examples where what the guidelines should be, how technology should be used, is decided in collaborative way. And I know in oncology as well, the National Health Authority has been trying to link payments to adherence to certain clinical guidelines, because you want to balance outcomes with costs in a condition like oncology. Otherwise, costs can inflate. I know we are very close to the time, so maybe I'll pick up one more question and then sort of go for the closing remarks. One of the question talks about the thorny issue or the difficult issue in healthcare again is the shortage of personnel, but specifically doctors, right? And so the question is there something being done again at a central level in an organized way to say how do we meet the shortage of doctors through public-private partnerships? Again, it can happen at different levels. But any thoughts? I mean, we talked about the delivery models themselves, but at the education level, could you talk about something that's happening to increase the pipeline of doctors in collaboration with private partners?
Yes, there are now programs where private entities are funded by the government. There is viability gap funding, the private medical colleges get. Then the courses are being, like DNP courses and other courses, I think, I'm not sure, are also being run through the private colleges. So a lot of, support in increasing the intake of students in the medical colleges across the country, not just in the public sector, but in the private sector, is being used. Now with the new NMC, a lot of empanelment or the affiliation criteria have been that it's simpler, it will be easier, so that more and more capacity across the country can be built. And I don't have the exact figures, but I think in the last 2 years, the number of medical colleges has gone up quite substantially compared to
maybe this is the absolute last because it's connected to our earlier discussion. But the broader point is, there are different kinds of clinical conditions, and you talked about the economics lens. So one concept is that of externality. Diseases that cause externality on other people. Maybe that's where government's role is larger, infectious diseases, pandemic, of course. But other conditions, say, diabetes. So one argument against government role is why should government get into diabetes management? And maybe this is just a provocative question for you to say, is that true, or is the government thinking in different ways? And no, even in non-communicable diseases, government has this particular role to play.
So you must be knowing that now the health and wellness sectors are being set up in the country, and a major mandate of these health and wellness sectors is NCDs. And it's even NCDs or diabetes or anything cardiovascular is no longer a disease of the village. Just as TB is no longer a disease of the poor. Right? So it affects everybody. The rickshawala in your area could be diabetic, could have a heart issue. So it is, for the private sector, it's important to understand the cost-benefit issue of investing in prevention is huge. For example, in TB, it is 1:33. Which sector do you get a return like that? And you're investing in a human being. Above everything. So NCDs has to, and it is becoming a major portion of the burden of disease. Burden of disease studies are carried out, and it is coming out as a major issue. So NCD has to be, and it has to become a very important part of government prevention strategy. And I'm happy to share with you that eventually now with the National Digital Health Mission, we are looking at creating unique IDs. So a person who had diabetes later got into the RCH database because she is pregnant. We know that this background is there, the red flag goes up. Right? So that is the kind of thing we're doing. And then linking it with AI. Here is where the diabetes is more, where the chronic disease is more, where this is happening. So I think in the future is very exciting. And NCD and communicable disease are both going to play a major part in our research. And these, COVID has shown us that communicable diseases are also not going away.
Okay.
And linked with NCDs, with comorbidities, we have seen that people with comorbidities, the mortality is higher. So one needs to focus on this.
That's right. No, that's absolutely important. And one other theme that came out, just sort of I wanted to summarize, is government's role in healthcare is also because of the economic burden that it places on certain sections of the society, impoverishment that comes through because the expenditure on health. And so we can't say that the government cannot intervene in some parts of healthcare and do in others. Thank you, Ms. Ahuja, again for your time. I'm going to hand it over to Guru now for closing remarks. And thanks to the audience for wonderful questions.
So can I say thanks before you speak? Thank you so much. Actually, they were wonderful questions and I thoroughly enjoyed discussing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ahuja, for your time. I know we've partnered earlier, and in your current role, this is a wonderful opportunity for us to start talking about doing more. And I like the way you put this public-private partnership and the role of private sector in rejuvenating public health system in terms of not just we've been hearing a lot about this whole of government approach, especially in the recent pandemic sort of management, and use the phrase whole of society approach. And I think that's a nice way to sort of talk about how the private sector can and should. Sorry, yes.
Can I come in and tell you that there is an empowered group of which I'm a part, which is only for private sector.
Great. So I think I like the way it was articulated, because I think it reinforces the fact that everybody needs to join together when it comes to sort of managing healthcare, especially in a country of the size and sort of diversity of like India, right? So, and I really personally I enjoyed the sort of your insights, but also the questions, Sarang, that you posed and some of our audience members posed as well. So Ms. Ahuja, thank you very much. I know it's a busy time, and the fact that you took out 1 hour for us is really something that we greatly appreciate. Sarang, as always, thank you very much for making time, and also more importantly for sort of bringing out the best from Ms. Ahuja with your questions. Something that I forgot to mention earlier in the introduction, I should say that now. Sarang is someone who's been repeatedly voted as best professor of the year at ISB. So this is one of those things where he's asking a question on the other side to you. So in some sense, he's doing a different role reversal of sorts. But Sarang, thank you very much again. And also thanks to the Max Institute at ISB for their partnership. And to our wonderful audience, thank you for spending time with us this afternoon. And we'll continue to sort of come back with more such dialogues. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, and happy Doctor's Day.